Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yanique Lockhart-Walker. I'm the Youth Services Director for UPO. I'd like to welcome you to our 5th Annual Equity Forum. In previous years, we've discussed affordable housing, education, and bridging the digital divide with transformation, equity, and innovation. This is our second discussion about mental health because our nonprofit is about uniting people with opportunities, and we can only achieve our goals when our customers address their mental health. Each equity forum is designed to share insights and practical advice so we can improve critical social issues that affect underrepresented groups. Today, we amplify the voices of leaders who show us the way to mental health resilience as we emerge from the pandemic. Now it is my honor to introduce our moderator, Dr. Mary Roary, Chief Equity Officer for the Center for Behavioral Health Statistics and Quality. She is a public health epidemiologist who focuses on infectious and chronic diseases. Her goal is to become an influential champion of eliminating health disparities using data-driven best practices. She is an adjunct professor at the Catholic University of America and has worked in government, academia, and private industry. Dr. Roary will now lead our discussion.
Thank you. So can you all hear me? Thumbs up? Okay, very good. We're going to do things differently. I'm getting ready to mix it up right now. So for the next 30 seconds, we're going to honor those who are no longer here with us because enough was not enough to save them from the pandemic, mental health challenges, and all other challenges. So let's take 30 seconds to honor them. Thank you. Thank you all. Now let's turn our attention to thanking all of you for not only joining us today, but for your thankless, countless hours that you have spent serving and saving others. And just in case you try to log off early, don't do it because you're in for a treat. We want to make sure that we thank UPO, United Planning Organization, Uniting People with Opportunities. It's all UPO, AKA for their 400 overly dedicated, talented team that is serving over 55,000 low-income DC residents on their journey from poverty to economic security. With a special thanks to the UPO planning team, Mary Roary, who is Youth Service Director and Coordinator of all things, Daniel Ofori Adoa, who is the Executive Vice President and Chief Impact Officer, Andrea Thomas, who is the President and CEO, and you bet, a special thanks to the marvelous communication team, Josephine Bucara, Chivo, Zohara Rome, and Marquez Ross. And if I chopped up anybody's name, my apologies right now. Again, we thank you all, but we're also giving you your call to action right now to not only sit here and listen and learn about the whys, but also vow that you will circle back to the speakers, to the panel, to UPO, to do something about this today. We will not lose another person to this pandemic, mental health challenge, and or the intersection of both. Instead, we will let folks know that it's okay to say that you're not okay and that we're here to help you. Now, this is going to be really interactive. I want everybody to go to the chat box and let us know where you're checking in from. Also, as I introduce this esteemed panel, I want you to put one word in the box that defines mental health equity. Okay, and if I don't see the words popping in the box, you know I'm going to get upset and call you all out. So let's go to the chat box. Thank you. Now, as we do that, I want to introduce this esteemed power panel. All of them have tons of accolades. They're too numerous to mention or share during our short time. However, I will take a few seconds to highlight some of the things that jump out and stand with me. Dr. Westley Clark, who is formerly the Dean Executive Professor of Public Health at St. Clara University in California. Dr. Clark has received numerous awards for his contributions to the field of mental health, substance use, and everything else that you can think of. And on a national level, he has led efforts to provide effective and accessible treatment to all Americans with addictive disorders. He has also worked for Senator Edward Kennedy as a health counsel at the U.S. Senate Committee on Labor and Human Relations. He is the former director over at SAMHSA, Center for Substance Abuse Treatment, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. He previously worked at San Francisco Veterans Administration, where he led outpatient programs treating veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder, aka PTSD. We also have joining us today a licensed child psychologist who is now working at Behavioral and Education Solutions, Dr. McIntyre, who has a background in school psychology and divides her time between counseling, mental health, consulting, psychological assessment, comprehensive school services for children and adolescents. She specialized in CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, play therapy, and other evidence-based treatment to support children and their families with a wide range of emotional, behavioral, and adjustment problems. And not finally, but equally stellar, dynamic, and hardworking is Dr. Yanique Lockhart-Walker. She is the Director of Operations of Community Wellness Ventures. From a young age, Dr. Walker has had a passion for serving and helping others. However, it was her multicultural background that led her to wanting to understand the impact of culture on mental health. Her priority is to improve the lives of those who have been negatively affected by trauma, poverty, violence, other factors that plague African Americans and Latinx communities. Now, your homework is to read the entire bios and network with people on the line. Message at least one person that you don't know today, exchange emails, and make sure you circle back to UPO, the panel members, to continue today's conversations. We need to exchange sustainable solution. What works in the field? All right, ready, set, go. Let's see what kind of answers we got. We got networking, education for families. We got support. Thank you all so much for putting in your responses. Okay, we're going to kick this off now with Dr. Clark. The first question is, why are we still grappling with mental health inequities in 2023? Please define it, share what you're doing about it, and also expand on the gap between those needing and getting treatment to grow. Dr. Clark, you're up. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mary, and it's a pleasure to be here. UPO is doing an awful lot to help the community, and I think UPO's agenda captures the notion of equity as a dynamic construct. But when we talk about policy in a larger sense, a macro sense, rather than a single organization, we're dealing with not only resources and services, we're dealing with outcomes across different groups. We have to look at those things. We have to look at race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender, age, economic status, country of origin, immigration status, other characteristics that define people and what they need. And so individuals who have access from a mental health point of view to healthcare services becomes an important issue. I know in the public sector, you rely on programs like UPOs, but you also rely on what the city is doing in terms of its resources, but these resources are limited. So in order to achieve mental health equity, we have to continue to identify the systemic barriers and inequalities that prevent people from getting access to the mental health services. So things have to be culturally sensitive, responsive to the needs of the people. And that's not always easy because a lot of people, particularly now in the political environment where people are worried about woke this and woke that, what we're seeing is from the mental health point of view, that equity is becoming a bad word. When in fact, if we want to increase the health of the community, we have to embrace mental health equity. And in order to achieve that, if we don't do that, if we don't look at the root causes of mental health issues, then we not only cannot achieve mental health equity, we can't address the needs of the community. So addressing systemic inequalities like poverty, racism, discrimination, and social isolation that affect mental health outcomes. These are things that are critical to the community. And we also have to deal with community attitudes. That's why I like UPO's agenda, because indeed, if the community doesn't embrace mental health as a theme, as an issue, then indeed you can have all the services in the world, but they're meaningless if they're not accessed. So we've got multiple variables. We have to increase access to mental health services. We have to promote mental health literacy. We have to invest in prevention and early intervention. We have to partner with communities. All of these are components of equity, and it's not a top-down thing. It's a holistic thing. So I don't want to take all the time on those issues, but I really think engaging with community leaders, the faith community, organizations that promote mental health, organizations like UPO, then if we don't do that, then we can't achieve mental health equity.
Thank you so much. I don't know. Let's see what's left. Dr. McIntyre, you're up next. Same question, but add why people are experiencing more stress, anxiety, trauma right now, more so ever than before. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here today. When I think about mental health equity, I also think about creating more opportunities and resources for people of color who desire to work in the mental health field. For instance, only 4% of African Americans make up the psychology workforce, according to the American Psychological Association. So even when people receive services and finally decide, okay, I'm going to seek therapy, this is something that I'm going to try, they may have trouble finding someone who understands their cultural worldview, which is critical given that people of color are less likely to seek these services anyways. And it also due to like the stigma and shame often associated with mental health concerns, as well as just the distrust of the system. So there is a need for having more of representation. It matters, having more people of color, because people can build rapport and trust in therapy when they feel that their mental health professional can really understand the cultural nuances or the daily experiences that they go through. Just navigating a white dominant society as a person of color. So I think it's really important when we think about equity and providing opportunities and resources in order to increase the number of people of color who are in the mental health field. And also just sharing our experiences, being able to reach back and going to your alma mater and talking to each other, making sure that we realize that a lot of times people are first generation when it comes to being in college and going to doctoral programs. So being able to share the knowledge and what that experience is like and encouraging others who may just feel discouraged about going into that field. And also for those who may feel discouraged about attending therapy because they don't see anyone who looks like them. So I think that is important. The second question goes into just the increase in anxiety and depression that we've seen, especially with the pandemic. And I think it's definitely with our youth. I think those are two situations things that I've seen personally with my clients that have just increased over time, that we've seen that even before the pandemic, that anxiety was it was growing in numbers. And then we see that it doubled after the pandemic. And then we know that suicide is the third leading cause of the death of young people between the ages of 15 to 24. So it is a grave thing to look at anxiety and depression statewide and nationally. And so when we see the numbers are soaring, we also see that it clashes with, again, the mental health provision, the ability to have access to healthcare, that these factors exacerbate the problems because they don't have access to the healthcare and mental health concerns. And so while we're thinking about these things of providing, again, information, psychoeducation, and being able to build to help with these issues and to help our children cope with anxiety and depression during this time.
Thank you so much. All right, Dr. Lockhart-Walker, same questions. And your thoughts on how having a multicultural background is value added in this post-COVID-19 mental health challenge paradigm.
Thank you so much for having me today. Welcome, everyone. So what we've been seeing, I've been in DC over 20 years and providing mental health services. And what I have found is that similar to what Dr. Teneisha has also shared is the lack of resources for the individuals that we serve. So it's very difficult for individuals to focus on their mental health if they don't have housing, if they don't have security in food, if they're lacking a lot of those minimal basic areas of their life that they need. How can you focus on your mental health? It feels like it's a minimal piece of what is happening, even though it is so important to include that in everyday part of your health. We're also seeing that a lot of the individuals do not feel comfortable seeking treatment, but once that treatment is provided and those opportunities are given, they want to be able to express the trauma. They want to be able to talk about what they're experiencing, but they have to have a safe place to do that. With all the violence that we're seeing in the city right now, sometimes even just going to a location outside of a neighborhood could cause more violence, which reduces the barriers to services and treatment. And so looking at multi-factors when serving the community is so important. You can't just look at one factor. You have to look at a person as a whole and really provide a holistic point of view when serving them. And to your second question, the multicultural aspect, I believe you have to assess an individual not just on their mental health concerns, but also what are the cultural backgrounds the cultural experiences that are leading and impacting their health and their mental health. If you're not taking that into account, if you're not taking the time to get to learn an individual and their cultural experience, you are doing a disservice not only to the clients that you're serving, but also to the community. It is up to us as practitioners to provide that type of care and that taking the time to really get to know our clients for who they are individually and really providing an individualized experience for each person.
Okay, thank you all for those thoughtful responses. And to our esteemed guests, you all need to go to the chat box and tell us what was one of the major takeaways from this first round of questions. But let me push forward. As Dr. McIntyre put it, how do we get to work on the things that you all just shared? Let's get to work. Dr. McIntyre, you're up first.
Yeah, I think how we get to work on working on equity, again, is thinking about how do we provide these experiences, right? So I believe that mental health equity is achieved by providing awareness, sharing our personal mental health experiences to decrease stigma and being more open. So having platforms like this where we get to share and discuss and have conversations. And then also too, again, thinking about someone like myself, when we're thinking about more people of color being in mental health fields, having supervision and mentoring, reaching back, sharing information and resources, and just recognizing the need and being able to kind of catapult or reach back to make that a statement and to help those who may, again, feel discouraged by that. I think it's also thinking about improving access to healthcare, promoting quality behavioral health programs and practices, reducing persistent disparities in mental health, and just having those services for our people and just people of color to be able to know and to use. I think sometimes, again, going back to psychoeducation, that people may not know about different resources or know that. And so being able to share and that they have those is important to talk about. I know that sometimes we look at social media as a negative, but I think it has been really important in pushing mental health. It has become now a hashtag. And so more people are curious, are interested in figuring out like, what does mental health look like? What is self-care? How can I do these things? And so when it's now that it's trending, people are more interested in those things. And so sometimes that promotes it. And it is a time where we can latch on and continue to push that movement and the conversations about normalizing and talking about mental health. And I think that definitely helps when we're thinking about our youth and those things of just having that conversation.
Thank you so much. Dr. Clark, I'd like you to respond to what Dr. McIntyre just shared and add your own thoughts. Thank you.
Well, I think Dr. McIntyre and Dr. Lockhart-Walker stressed some of the key points. I mean, what we've got to have is the community dialogue, community discussion, and people have got to recognize that discussion. So UPO has an agenda to help educate people about housing, about jobs, about volunteering and advocacy. And it's in a position to work with Barbara Bazran, who runs the behavioral health services for the District of Columbia, and then with the mayor to get the mayor to understand these issues, because increasingly there's a recognition that we need resources in our schools. Dr. Lockhart-Walker pointed out the violence issue is a major theme. If our various wards in DC become, shall we say, enclaves that cannot be, quote, crossed or violated, then that becomes an issue. Anxiety, fear, irritability. So partnering with the community, the faith community, community-based organizations, and working with the municipality becomes an approach. There is no simple solution here. So it's, as was pointed out, a multifactorial approach because it's a multifactorial problem. You've got an average income in DC of $93,000, but that doesn't tell the true story. That just tells you that, that there's a lot of money in DC, but the money is not evenly distributed. And so poor people are confronted with people who are not poor, and then they don't understand the disparity that is created. So having youth services, early childhood education, senior citizen programs, is one way that we can get that message out. I keep mentioning the faith community because sometimes the faith community can be helpful and sometimes they're not, because they don't necessarily, depending on who they are, they don't necessarily believe that you've got anxiety, you've got PTSD, you've got depression, or you've got schizophrenia, because there are people, we have to keep in mind that some people suffer from some fairly severe mental illness. It's a small percentage, but it's an important percentage in terms of irritability, violence, etc. So what Dr. McIntyre is saying in terms of having professionals, that's critical. But we also need that community around those professionals, because professionals can't do it all. I was fond of saying to my patients, I can see you 3 times a week, an hour each time. What happens the rest of the time? And if what's happening the rest of the time is chaos and confusion, then you see me for 3 hours may be a safe space, but it's not enough of a safe space to change your life. And that's what we're trying to do, is help people navigate their life, change their lives, reduce violence, and feel that they can compete in the marketplace of the community. DC is 45% African-American, but guess what? It's split. There's certain parts of the DC area where African-Americans are not wanted, are not welcome, or are suspect. So these are issues in terms of a community that is not heterogeneous, that doesn't communicate, that doesn't support. So again, to summarize Dr. McIntyre's point, Dr. Lockhart-Walker's point, work with Barbara Bazran from the city, work with organizations like UPO, get the faith community involved, get other organizations involved, so that indeed mental health is recognized as a component of your life.
There is no health without mental health.
There is no
Dr. Lockhart-Walker, that's right. You can just forget about it. We need a holistic approach. Dr. Lockhart-Walker, your thoughts on how we get to work. Dr. McIntyre and her works, mainly from her dissertation, is saying, how do we get to work? When do we get to work? How do we get to work? So I'm pushing it on you now. How do we get to work on this?
Yes, I agree. I think more training needs to occur. I know recently Trinity University had a training with clinicians on understanding adverse childhood experiences and training individuals specifically on how we can serve individuals who are experiencing multiple adverse childhood experiences and importance of that impact later on in life. So we need more programs that are willing to do the training. We need more individuals who are willing to do the work. We have a lot of clinicians now who there's a national shortage right now of clinicians providing services. And we have a lot of clinicians who are being burnt out, understandably so. So providing support to our current clinicians, providing mentorship to our clinicians who are, and training to our clinicians who are up and coming. As Dr. McIntyre said, but also working within the community. There are a lot of community members who are doing great work, and it's up to us to reach out, pull together as a community, from small areas to larger areas, to pull together, to work together so that resources aren't going unknown or not being utilized to be able to really fulfill the needs of each community we serve.
Dr. Clark, you want to weigh in on that? I saw your body language.
Oh, no,
You like
I'm
that?
agreeing with, I'm agreeing with her. So I agree with the comprehensive strategy. We've got, if people aren't accessing it because of biases and stigma, as Dr. McIntyre pointed out, then what we have are people sitting around with an empty seat, because at some point, you can have 50% of the people who schedule an appointment with you don't show. And yet the reason they schedule that appointment is because they have issues. But stigma, they don't prioritize. She said, there's no health without mental health. There's no family without people being healthy in the family. You've got multiple problems associated with this. So, but again, comprehensive programs like UPOs can help change that narrative. We have to change the narrative. We have to change the conversation. And as McIntyre points out, there's nothing wrong with talking to somebody about what's going on in your life so you can strategize and plan. Life isn't just about the hustle. We've got to work with our young people, and Dr. McIntyre is in that position. We've got people, young kids embracing this thug life. And as a result, people shooting people. Baltimore has been having a rash of 16-year-olds being shot by other 16-year-olds. And so we lose the one who's dead and the one who committed the homicide. He goes off for 10 to 20 years, and that's a problem. So not enough professionals is an issue, but not enough dialogue within the community to inspire people to become a professional, because you can do it in stages. You finish high school, you can get some community college, become a counselor. You go from being a counselor to become a social worker or a psychologist, master's level. So there are ways that you can stage this, but if you're not interested in it, then those ways are meaningless. So again, these are things. And yes, we need funding, as our chat group is saying, scholarships. There's a minority fellowship program at SAMHSA. Dr. Roary can talk about that. There are ways to facilitate the education. And these days with online training, you don't even have to leave home unless, of course, you're one of those people who prefers to leave home. So you can acquire a lot of skills other than your internships online. So, but if you're not interested in it, if because of stigma and discrimination, you don't see it as, in the case of men, manly, if you don't see it as in the case of women, something you want to do, everyone's not going to go into tech. And so we've got this fantasy, that's the only way to achieve stable income. That's not the case.
So you pushing me. So about this behavioral health workforce. So how do we make it sexy or more appealing to our young people? And how low do we go? When do we start enticing them with this? Is it elementary school or is it too late? So like where do we start? That's a huge problem. We have a huge gap that when people who finally do say, oh, I'm going to go get some help, there's no one there that they can connect with multiculturally or on a cultural level to say, hey, you know what, I need help, and you get where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
Solution.
solution.
Yeah, I'm pushing y'all. It wasn't on the script, by the way. I had to throw that in there.
Yeah, I think even elementary school is good to have conversations about it, about different career paths and things that you can do. I really like that Dr. Lockhart said that even in the community, there are people who are doing work who may not necessarily be a licensed psychologist, but still have the credentials of talking about mental health. And that may be someone who people within the community trust more to have those conversations and think about it more to maybe then pursue therapy or talk to someone who is a professional. So again, having those conversations with children at an early age about different things that you can pursue and that there are steps. So I might not want to necessarily be a psychologist, but I can be a social worker or a counselor, or I can, provide in the community support or talk about these things as providing psychoeducation and those things. And so I think it's different routes that you can go. But again, these are conversations that we have to have as a community, and so that it is known or the information is out there so that people may want to desire to do so.
Okay.
Role models and mentoring. Sorry.
Yes, role models and mentoring
Yes.
for sure.
And I think training and utilizing peer supports is so important because for many people, they may not be ready, as Dr. McIntyre said, to be able to talk to a counselor, but they may be interested in working with a peer who had some training, who had some background to provide resources and to get them to a place where they do feel comfortable to be able to reach out for mental health support. So that is another place I think we need to take time to do and advocate for.
An intergenerational investment, getting our senior citizens UPO has a foster grandparent program, an opportunity to start talking about those things, how you feel, what you're doing, working with peers, but also working with people with lived experiences beyond peers. That's kind of helpful, as opposed to these artificial personality types that we foster. Again, I mentioned thug life, which all I see is a lot of people killing each other over basically not much of anything. So the value of our lives in our community is not enhanced with the current kind of attitudes that people have to have this false persona in their lives. And so peers, grandparents, parents, faith community, all of those entities play a critical role in how we navigate our lives and who's giving us information about our choices. We have a normalization of incarceration, and that normalization has with it the adverse consequence of having no hesitance to use guns, having no hesitance to act out. We now have teachers who are being assaulted in school. And so teachers are saying, I don't want to teach because things are out of control. And we have to, only the community gathering around saying that it's not about control and it's not about hurting you. It's about producing people who can map out their own future with the support of their community and their family, because family is important.
It's everything. And it's going to take a village. I know, but people have said, oh, yeah, it's going to take every last one of us on this screen that's not on the screen, that came, that didn't show up. It's going to take all of us to pull this off. That's why we gave you your call to action. There are some awesome comments also, if you all get a chance to read the chat box. And if you all have some questions that you want to ask us while I'm asking more questions, feel free to put it in the chat box. All right, let's go to some tough questions. Now, let's look at this mental health pandemic and its challenge, as Dr. Clark mentioned earlier, from a systemic perspective. How are we seeing in the day-to-day world via the news, TikTok, blogs, TED Talks, movies, and such about behavioral challenges that youth are facing, pandemic-born babies are facing, midlife stage adults, that, by the way, is my age group, 40 to 65 or so, seniors, and now that we're living much longer, our seniors. So what are your thoughts about that? Dr. Lockhart-Walker, we're going to start with you first. Kick us off.
what we've been seeing is an increase in anxiety, an increase in depression, as Dr. McIntyre mentioned. We're seeing a lot of individuals having difficulty with basic socialization skills. So if you don't have the ability to communicate or to be able to cope with even small difficulties or small challenges, that's going to lead to more and more stress and more and more mental health concerns. We're also seeing a significant impact of food instability, housing instability, as I stated earlier, and that does not seem to be getting any better. It seems like things are, as we know, when we go to the grocery store, food is a lot more expensive, but resources are a lot less. And so if we have more and more people who are experiencing limited resources or lack of resources, they're going to oftentimes choose illegal behaviors or behaviors that are harming to other people because they don't have the ability to be able to use those positive skills they would have learned in schools, or they would have learned had they been around other people or had that support system. So we need to take the time to really understand each person, to be able to fulfill those resources, to be able to help our children and to learn those coping skills, to pick them back up to get them to a developmental level that they're able to cope and to be able to function back in the world. We're seeing that from infants all the way through adults. And so I think providing that support, having more resources so that people don't feel like they have no other choice than to experience illegal behaviors or erratic behaviors or not having the resources needed to be able to cope with their mental health concerns.
Dr. Clark, go right for it.
I have to agree with both Dr. Lockhart-Walker and Dr. McIntyre. The anxiety and worry, moving from social isolation to social suspicion. Some people still recovering from loss and grief. They lost parents or relatives to the pandemic, and now they're post-pandemic. Academic stress, going from being remote learning experiences where people started to fall behind to face-to-face experiences. Then, while Dr. McIntyre talked about social media, but there is some screen time and digital overload. People get lost in that. And this is creating fatigue, eye strain, some irritability, some diminished social skills. So we've got those as issues. So we have to encourage social connections where their people are valued. We have to encourage healthy habits, exercise, healthy eating. And unfortunately, in some parts of the city, it may not be safe to go out on the street to exercise. That is a problem. So what we have to do is make sure that people have safe spaces as not only for therapy purposes, but also just to be, especially our young people. Then support in the academic environment, support in terms of the appropriate mental health, because if you call it, you've got a psychological problem, young people who may shy away from that. So, and then we've got trauma and stress. We've got problems with our police. On the one hand, we need our police. On the other hand, sometimes the police, shall we say, overstep, and we have to deal with that. So I know the city is trying to work with the police so that they don't have to deal with people in mental health crises. But some people who are skilled in dealing with mental health will deal with mental health crises. So we don't have these escalations. And then the economic insecurity and financial stress, there is not a simple solution for that. We have to help people deal with that. And this, some of the job training that organizations like UPO do, that might be quite helpful so that people can find skills. And then the federal government and the city government do offer some opportunities, but we need to deal with those. And then the whole issue of defelonization, people who have felony backgrounds may find it harder to get jobs. And therefore, as Dr. Lockhart-Walker pointed out, I might as well be involved in the illegal marketplace. And that then just feeds on itself. So we have to do that. Again, working with the local government, working with the faith community, working with organizations like UPO that have a broad spectrum of services and outreach to the community. And don't forget outreach. We've got to have that sort of a constant message. People need to hear that it's okay. So for our seniors, using opportunities like Meals on Wheels, where people have an opportunity to talk to somebody as they are afraid to go out. I was originally from Detroit. My mother was 80-something years old. She was afraid to go out. She got knocked down and ripped off. So there's no respect for seniors. So seniors feel they are threatened, and therefore depression sets in, social isolation sets in, etc. So I'll let Dr. McIntyre pick up from there.
Thank you. Yeah, I definitely agree. Going back into just the high rates of anxiety and depression among our youth is very a critical issue that's going on, especially that we see coming after the pandemic, that numbers for anxiety have doubled. And I think children, that has been mentioned before, that children have become uncomfortable with isolating themselves, that they no longer kind of reach out for that social connectivity because they have been used to being by themselves or kind of being in their rooms with their devices. And I think it has become a distraction, but also they've started to form an unhealthy attachment to their phones and other devices. And I've just learned through my clinical practice that children really see their phones as a coping strategy. I know a lot of times parents think that, it's disrupting sleep, or that it's kind of it's negative, and it's a thing that they really want to just reframe and take away. And I had a client who talked about using her phone at night as a distraction from her worries and suicidal ideations. And so it's typically that children can use distraction as a way of attempting to cope with pain, rather than reducing the pain itself, especially when it's an avoidable stressor, something that can't be avoided, that they will maybe distract themselves. And so thinking about and understanding my client and how she was using her phone, thinking about how we can form healthy attachments with our phone. So it's not usually the phone itself, but it's pretty much how we're using it. So we think about it with anything else, like food. Food is good. It's nourishing for our bodies. It fuels us. But if we overindulge, it can end up being a problem. And so it's the same with thinking about phones. And it makes sense because during the pandemic, a lot of times our children didn't have any other things to do. They didn't have going to games or their extracurricular activities or basketball practice or hang out with friends, going to the gym. The thing to connect was using your phone. And so now it's about, as Dr. Lockhart said, also is about readjusting. How can we go back into balancing some of our coping strategies, regaining and coming out of the pandemic and realizing that we can go back to some of the things that we used before with physical connection and reaching out and connecting with others, rather than isolating ourselves and exposing ourselves to those things. Because with anxiety, sometimes avoiding is the thing that makes us feel comfortable. It's that temporary relief when we avoid the situations that makes us scared or worried. But knowing that exposure and exposing yourself to those things, it may feel uncomfortable at first, but over time, it builds the resilience to be able to say, okay, I can get back into the swing of maybe hanging out with a small group of friends and maybe going to an organization or event, and thinking about parents now, thinking about how they want to events or organizations or things they want their children to be part of for the summer. So this is the time to start thinking about those things. So to prepare those students who may have anxiety towards it, so that they can start to be thinking and wrapping their mind around, this may be something that I'll be doing during the summer, or doing this camp or whatever. But I think it's definitely about kind of readjusting into back into old practices of coping strategies that maybe we've forgotten. I also think that it impacts our younger ones too. So looking about infancy and our toddlers, how that now they may lack school readiness skills. So a lot of times going into the classroom, they, it looks maybe that they have a deficit or that they have a disability. And so now we see referrals are going up. And so everyone maybe have a diagnosis, but in reality, it's just they haven't had the opportunity to get those resources because they were at home or virtual. So a lot of times people were in kindergarten or preschool doing virtual schooling, and that wasn't sufficient because they needed to be in the physical classroom. And so thinking about and taking time with our younger ones to realize that maybe we need some additional supports and not rushing to diagnose or rushing to have an IEP, which is an individual education plan, but that we actually need to put in some resources and some interventions in place so that they can respond to them and catch up. I think it's important. And even thinking too for our mothers who were also during the pandemic, who may have had stress and that may have impacted their pregnancy as well. And so those things are important to think about how they are impacting our children and that we are making sure that we're giving them the chance to grow and not just putting labels on our children or saying that this is something that's wrong with you, but that we're giving them the resources and opportunity to reach their full potential.
I'd like to point out that we also need to worry about our parents. Remember, during the pandemic, there's a lot of dysfunctional behavior that crept into parents' behavior. And then that then offered, shall we say, a dysfunctional role model for our youth. Parents were, those who had jobs were suddenly at home, or they were suddenly at home 24/7, and as opposed to having time away. So there was the issue of irritability, there's the issue of substance use, there's the issue of conversations that used to be spaced, they're now concentrated. And so these young kids, both toddlers and latency age kids and teenagers, witness that. You witness your parents and, shall we say, in their worst situation. So part of this is maybe getting parents to relook at what they were going through during the pandemic with anxiety, depression, uncertainty, especially if you're working in the gig economy or you're working in a job that suddenly laid you off, not because of something you did or something, but because of something over which you had no control. So all of these things operate in that comprehensive paradigm that Dr. McIntyre and Dr. Lockhart-Walker were talking about. So don't forget the parents. They learned a lot of dysfunctional stuff during the pandemic. They got to unlearn that.
Okay, so while we're at it and on the pandemic, how do we prepare now for the next pandemic? What were some of the lessons learned from this time around that we can take moving forward? I believe prevention is key. So if we strategize right now and get it together now, when it comes, we'll be able to be like, just keep going. But if we don't, we'll be caught with our pants off like we were this time and be like, oh, what are we going to do? Let's not go there. So what are some of the things that we can share right now? Some strategies, some cost-effective, definitely going to work strategies to prepare ourselves now for the next pandemic. I'm going to start with you, Dr. Clark. What are your thoughts?
I think we know that another pandemic is coming, but we also have these the politicization of pandemics. So, and that creates a lot of discord in the community. The issue of vaccines, there's a lot of tension whether you should get the vaccine, which shouldn't get the vaccine. And I'm not getting it. All of that stuff created furor. So what we have to do is to recognize we have to reach the community. And the beauty of that is that it is what we've been talking about all hour. It is about the community. It is about getting people where they are so that the strategies that you employ, you have buy-in by the people who you're trying to influence. And that it isn't about professionals knowing more. It's about doing things that are positive in someone's life, that they can trust you. One of the things we talk about in therapy is trust. Do I trust you as a practitioner? Do I trust the message? Can I think about what you've been saying? So we want to build trust in the community. We want, in order to worry about the next strategy, because we don't know what the nature of the disease is. If it was like this, the COVID-19, then we saw what happened. This was the same thing that happened in 1918. In 1918, people accepted things. In 2020, they didn't accept those things. 30% of the people refused to cooperate. It took a long time for people to get the vaccines. And so we weren't able to reconstruct our society. So fostering trust, enhancing communication, working with, as Dr. McIntyre said, from the fetus to the senior citizen who's, and as a senior citizen, I get to speak for my age cohort, making sure that we're all on board with what needs to be done. And if we can do that, I think we can make some progress for the next pandemic. Will there be more resources? I can't tell you. Will be the same? I don't know. But we do know that if the community doesn't trust you, they don't trust public health, they don't trust professionals, it's because professionals fail to communicate what the real issue is and fail to connect with the people who they're supposed to be bringing the message to. So I think that's it. So I'll defer to Lockhart-Walker and McIntyre.
I agree wholeheartedly with what Dr. Clark said. I think it is up to us to provide more information to ensure that individuals have an understanding of how they can improve their health, how they can have access to doctors and resources and community members that they trust to be able to share that information. I think we need to prepare our school systems to be able to function should they have to shut down again, and what that would look like. How can we improve, finding ways to improve socialization of our children in the event we are isolated at home again. I feel like we can take what we've learned during this pandemic to be able to improve the care of our children by creating socialization groups. I know a lot of families had pods where children in small groups came to learn together, and they were still able to receive some of that care that they would have received in a larger school setting on a smaller scale. And so I think using some of those tools and techniques that we learned and providing those resources and improving ways to communicate, providing more technology to our communities that don't have the technology resources, to ensure that everyone has access to information and not just individuals who have more resources, is going to be key in improving that communication. I'll pass it to you, Dr. McIntyre.
Thanks. I think this, if I had to speak to on the individual level of someone who was like, how do I get through a second pandemic? What am I going to do? Like, we already went through this. It was definitely tough. How would I ever get through a second one? And so I think, although the pandemic was difficult, I think it helped a lot of people be aware of their inner strength and resourcefulness. I think in general, our brains prefer to have a sense of certainty. We love to feel secure about the future and what's coming next. But a sense of a certainty helps us feel more secure and allows us, it allows us to plan for what's coming. But of course, true certainty is impossible. It's impossible to know like what is actually going to happen next. And so when we feel uncertain, we can feel out of control, like we don't have any control. And so I think during a pandemic and during other stressful times, it's hard to just, again, know what's happening or what's in our control. However, the pandemic serves as evidence that it's possible to cope through and manage uncertainty, that we can show resilience, which I think is a great mental health strategy that can be necessary in multiple facets of life, of thinking about the time or when you were able to cope through, even though it was difficult. Anyone, when you become down or upset, or just kind of think about what you've been through and how you demonstrated resilience. I think a lot of times we know that our thoughts are linked to our feelings and our behaviors. If we're able to change our thinking or our thoughts about what it was. So if we only think about like the negative of the pandemic or the things that we were took away or we lost, those are all very valid. And those are feelings that we can talk about and express, but also staying there sometimes keeps us stuck. So also thinking about the positives are what can also propel us to move forward with our pain, how we were able to use that and push forward and move on and move through the pandemic. I think that can be a reminder to cope with those negative thoughts and feelings that doesn't really make us get stuck into the point of where we just can't move forward. Like, man, I have to go through this all over again. That can be very discouraging, but pulling on and thinking about the resources of things that actually got me through, or maybe the things that I learned or I took, or new strategies. I read somebody in the comments said, I started a garden and that was really helpful for me. Thinking about those positive moments, during the pandemic or those learning experiences may help you have the, withal to say, okay, I can do, it's going to be hard, but I can get through this.
Yes, self-reliance, resilience, and adaptability. Those are three constructs that I get from Dr. McIntyre, Lockhart-Walker, that summarizes some of these things. And so we don't know what your resources are going to be like. We don't know whether you're going to have a job or not. We don't know whether the school's going to shut down or not. But as Dr. McIntyre and Lockhart-Walker was saying, what comes out of this is that indeed we did make it through. We were able to be adaptable. We understand the value of social connectedness, self-reliance, and resilience. But we have to foster strategies. But then there are those people who do have significant reactions to those kinds of stressors. And so we have to make sure that they have access to support systems, whether it's professional care or not professional care, so that we don't lose them to suicide, we don't lose them to homicide, we don't deal with rage and irritability to the point of self-destruction or dysfunction. So there are positive things that came out of that experience, but there are also negative things. We have to balance those things, strategize how to deal with those negative things and how to enhance those positive things. So.
Okay, I'm going to the Q&A. I got 2 tough questions for you. Let me read it. It's common in our culture to feel pressure to overwork, which can lead to feelings of burnout. And experiencing burnout manifests itself in one work life and personal life. How do we minimize that on an individual level? And how do we create workspaces that don't lead people to feel burnt out? And I am going to start with you, Dr. Lockhart-Walker.
Thank you. One of the things that we always tell our clinicians, our staff, our case managers is making sure that you're taking time, even if it's only 20 minutes a day, for that self-care. That self-care is so key, whether it's just a warm bath, whether it's listening to music, taking a walk, exercising, doing reading a book, something for you, just for you, even if it's for a short amount of time. We're preaching this all the time to the individuals that we care and work with, but we're not always taking the time to do it for ourselves. And I think as far as in a workplace, you need to have individuals, supervisors that provide that support, that you know that you can go and have a conversation with if needed. When you're feeling burnt out or feeling stressed, that you can take a few minutes to go talk to. Having that open door policy in the workplace is so key, that at least one person is there and available to support the staff and being a resource when you're feeling overwhelmed. Using your support team, your family, your friends, your loved ones to be able to express how you're feeling. Don't keep it in. And don't feel like you can't seek help. You don't have to be, a lot of stigmatization indicates that you have to be crazy or you have to be so extreme, like hearing voices or you can't get out of bed in order to seek help. Preventative care is just as important. Having a counselor just to talk about your day-to-day stressors can be so key in preventing you from getting to a place where you're feeling more stress or more anxiety or more depression. So using that preventative care, leaning on your support system, and taking time for you on a daily basis will help you with moving forward and having a greater sense of self.
That's awesome. Dr. McIntyre, you're up.
Yes, I agree. I think self-care is very important to make sure that you're taking those times and being proactive in your health and making sure you are engaging in different activities throughout the day. We talked about that a lot when we're thinking about UPO and like the teachers and the staff, of being able to just take small moments to take deep breaths and kind of recollect. before going back, because a lot of times we have compassion fatigue as teachers, mental health workers, anybody who is providing service to someone else, that you start to feel, even parents may start to feel just a lag of that they can't provide empathy, or that they feel kind of, and that goes into that burnout of not being able to fully care because they're taking on so much of the trauma and experiences where it's kind of impacting their ability to provide empathy. And you may see yourself being irritable or withdrawn or just having a lack of energy to do those things. And so self-care is very helpful. I think a lot of times, and it's International Women's Day, it's also Women's History Month. And so thinking about women, and Black women in particular, always feeling like they have to be the strong Black woman, or that they have to hold in their emotions, act like superwoman, protect themselves, be self-sacrificing. And all of those things are very stressful, right? So in the day-to-day, you may look and say, oh, my mom was able to do all these things. It looks great. But in the all, we don't realize that our moms are having a lot of stress. They're dealing with a lot of things that maybe sometimes we may think, like Dr. Lockhart said, that it's not as important. It's not because I'm not crazy, or I'm not having these extreme symptoms, that it's fine. I can deal with it. I can cope with it. But then that adds up, and that we see that it also leads to other health problems when you're not really fully dealing with stress, that it can go into other significant health problems. And so it's important that we really think about how to kind of let go of that persona, that we can ask for help, that we don't have to do it all, that we can lean on our village and lean on others around us who can support us and help us, whether if we're a parent and maybe we'll say, I'm not going to do it all. I'm going to lean on someone else in my family to take care of my child today because I need a mental health day. Normalizing that. That's okay. That's fine that we need those days and need to take a breath. And I think a lot of times when we're just always on the go, it's hard to kind of stop and realize, like, I need to take a break. I'm starting to experience burnout, and recognizing and being more self-aware of what that looks like is very important.
Take us home, Dr. Clark.
Burnout is predictable. I mean, it happens. And you need, if you can't recognize the symptoms, you need to have someone in your social network who you can trust. You get changes in mood, difficulty focusing, changes in appetite and sleep patterns, increased anxiety or worry, social withdrawal, I got to have an extra glass of wine, decreased productivity. You've got a lot of things to do, but they're not making a lot of sense. So these things are predictable outcomes of being overwhelmed. And sometimes when you're in the mix, you can't recognize that you're in the mix. So again, as Dr. McIntyre and Dr. Lockhart-Walker was saying, if you have that social network where if you can't see it, somebody else can see it. And if you trust that person, you can step back and say, well, yeah, wow, that is true. Let me take that mental health day. Let somebody else take care of the kids today. Maybe I should rotate my role. If it depends on the age of your children. I'll take the kids on Saturday, you take the kids on Sunday, or something to that effect. There are these sort of petite strategies that you can employ to give yourself that breathing room. And as people are pointing out on the chat, there are various self-exercises that you can do, that you should do, because indeed this is predictable. We're very much aware of that. There's a discussion that's been going on this past week about the 4-day work week versus the 5-day work week. Communities are experimenting with that. So employers are also exploring those possibilities, but burnout is predictable. It happens to us all. If you get so overwhelmed and trying to do a good job, being a great parent, taking care of everything, then eventually, if you don't build in respites for yourself, you will encounter the real possibility of a burnout.
Okay, power round. So what are your thoughts on faith-based solutions? And while we're at it, I want us to be thinking about what are the next steps for UPO and the DC residents? What else could they be doing? And how can we also help them in their charge? So, all right. So this is a question from the chat box. What are your thoughts about faith-based solution? Dr. Clark, I'm going to you first. So let's talk about it.
I think the faith community needs to be linked with the professional community, and when I mean professional and counselors, et cetera, so that we can share the dialogue. if you've got a faith community that is so fundamental that it says, oh no, God is going to solve everything, then it essentially blames you and your faith. If you're feeling overwhelmed, if you got anxiety, you got depression, you've experienced trauma. And when I was at CSAT, we foster a working relationship with faith communities so that we start educating people in the faith community about the signs of depression, the signs of schizophrenia, the signs of bipolar affective disorder, et cetera, so that there's that dialogue, so that the representatives of the faith community don't drop the ball in their zeal to make it a test of your faith. In those situations, things work out. A lot of faith communities have counseling, pastoral counseling. They understand that people have stress and have been traumatized. They don't just wash over these things, and they work with those people who are trained separately and make sure that we don't challenge people's religious beliefs. But when a person becomes self-destructive, as it were, or is burning out, as it were, then it takes everybody's effort. Now, again, there are some in the faith community that have views that essentially exclude professional observation, but then they're accepting that responsibility, and that is a tremendous thing. So I think working with the faith community is advantageous. That a lot of people have been brought up in the church, they believe in the church, and if you've got a person, a pastor or rabbi or imam or whomever who recognizes the full spectrum of what people go through, they'll work with you because they'll say, this is beyond me. This person needs something else, or this person needs additional services, and I'm willing to work with those people so that we can help members of my congregation or synagogue or mosque or church or what have you. And I'll kick the ball to Lockhart-Walker or Dr. Mack.
Thank you.
I mean, I think it's important that our youth do understand, or just in general, not even just youth, that everyone understands that it can coexist, that having faith-based as well as mental health education and mental health awareness can coexist in the same realm. I think a lot of times, and I think just like different people's upbringings may have conflicted a lot, that I think just how Dr. Clark was saying that sometimes that, you can't really have anxiety or worry or those things if you have faith or prayer. Like those things shouldn't coexist, that you should just have prayer or faith. But I do think that we are moving kind of more, I've seen more into a realm where both are coexisting together, that people are realizing that in, their churches or wherever their praise and worship or wherever their religious aspects, that they do have more counseling or mental health awareness, or they're talking about it more in relation to, and that it's not just, one-sided, or that you can't have both. And I think that helps people feel more comfortable about reaching out to, again, seeking therapy and doing those things, that they don't feel as if maybe they're defying, their beliefs or doing something against that's not going to be accepted in their communities. And so I think as long as we continue to have a dialogue about both coexisting together, I think that will help people feel more comfortable about reaching out to those spaces who have maybe a very religious background, who may not have automatically said, okay, I think it's a mental health issue or something that I can, kind of pray about it and that things will eventually go away, that it may be a more serious issue. And so I think just having talking about it and the information out there helps people feel more comfortable about reaching out and seeking therapy and psychological or mental health services.
Hear, hear.
Dr. Lockhart-Walker.
I agree with both Dr. Clark and Dr. McIntyre. I think it was well said, and I think the incorporation of the two is so important. And as a clinician or a mental health provider or behavioral health provider, taking the time to understand the individuals that we're serving, what their religious beliefs are, and determining if they would like that incorporated into their treatment and what that would look like, so that we are providing that support and merging the two together to be able to to be the best resource we can be, and then educating the faith-based organizations on mental health, and to ensure that they have an understanding, because a lot of information is not correct, which leads to a lot of bias and a lot of misconceptions. So I think providing that education to faith-based organizations is key to also helping them to understand what are areas that we can assist with and what are areas we may need to refer out or partner with a provider or agency to support our participants.
Thank you. So before we wrap up, I'm going to push you all. I need a 30-second or less response on so what? UPO has brought us to this point. Thank you. The residents are thriving and benefiting. What are the next steps? Now what? So what? Now what? So 30 seconds. Let's try this, Dr. Clark. I'm going to you first. 30 seconds. So what? Now what? Now what?
Now what is continuing to do what you were doing, continuing to work with the community, continuing to work with the municipality, continue to work with the faith community, continue to work with youth and parents and grandparents, and spread the message, and just take care of yourself while you're doing it.
I know that's right. That's awesome. Okay, Dr. Lockhart-Walker. So what now? UPO, DC residents, now what? And we remember, people are still killing themselves, getting shot, overdose. Now what?
Right.
I think now it's important time for us to partner together. Now it's a time for us to build on the strengths that we have in our community to improve. Now is the time to get that education. Family members, if you see somebody or friend struggling, reach out, check in on them, and connect them to a place where they feel comfortable. Let's get the information out there. Let's work together to build a stronger community.
Amen. Dr. McIntyre, let me just pause right here. As soon as you open up your church, I'll be the first person right there at the door. Now go ahead and give your 30-second response. I made the positivity, can do it. How do we get to yes? It's all within you. So what? UPL,
Yes.
they do a fabulous job. What's next? How are the DC residents going to get to the next level?
Thank you. I think it's communication, collaboration, and education. I think we all should just continue to work together and make sure that we're ensuring that everyone can thrive and meet their full potential, that we continue to work together and making sure we're talking and having platforms like this, that we communicate and talk with each other about what's happening, what's going on, and that we reach out and collaborate with each other when we see the need within the community. And we continue to just, again, work together, collaborate, and spread the education about mental health awareness. I think that is cool. I think exactly what you said, that we all have the tools in us. It's already there. We just have to bring it out by, again, communicating, collaborating, and providing education.
Well said. So before I turn over the mic to our fierce leader, I'm going to leave you all with a few things. Number one, everything that you heard, wonderful, awesome. Don't forget about the data. Data collection is pivotal to this entire process, because without it, we can't get a bigger check from Congress and their cousins. So make sure that the data is at the forefront. Some of the downfalls of us working and helping people never gets communicated. Make sure it's peer-reviewed publications, blogging, TikTok, the good stuff, right? So not only the fun stuff, but the good stuff. Get our young people excited about behavioral health. What's more sexier than saving another person's life? Nothing. Also, take care of yourselves. The better you take care of yourselves, the better you can take care of other people, right? And I'm getting t-shirts. It's okay to say you're not okay. It's okay. Let the stigma, let all the let all of that go. People in other races and ethnicities live long and thrive and do well because they're not afraid to say that there's something wrong. They don't care who thinks that there's something wrong. We have the power to begin to say, you know what? It don't matter. I'm not okay. I need some help. Please help me. We're here to help. But again, it's going to take a village approach to make sure no one's left behind. LGBTQI, folks in the prison populations, homeless, all of us together, we can get there together. So I would like to also encourage you all to review an article by Krista E. Johnson Abukowa, and I'm probably pronouncing her name wrong, so apologize to her wherever she's sitting, but it's on racism, COVID-19, and health inequity in the USA, a call to action. And now we will have closing remarks by UPO's phenomenal president and CEO, Andrea Thomas. Thank you so much from the panel, from the participants, from the White House, for your passion and leadership, because together we'll get there together just because of you. So thank you for this.
Thank you so much. When I spoke to you a few days ago, I told you we were going to keep echoing that it's okay to not be okay and to be real with one another. So in the spirit of realness, I need to put this paper over here. There we go. So to all of you who participated as our guests, first I want to say thank you to you. I was listening to our panelists, but also reading the information that was coming through in the chat, the comments, the questions, the thoughts, and what it echoed to me from the panelists to what we were seeing from the comments is that there are many different directions and avenues for us to address mental health, mental wellness, behavioral health, and that there is no one size that fits all. Right. And so we need to be and remain sensitive to that. And there are a couple of things that I just want to lift to remind everyone. Dr. McIntyre talked about 15 to 24-year-olds, that right now it's the third leading cause, suicide in that age group is the third leading cause of death. I challenge everyone today that when you leave here at some point before the day ends, a young person that is in your life that you know of, ask them, are you okay? Just reach out to them and ask them, how are you doing? And how are you really doing? And don't rush it. Wait, allow them an opportunity to actually answer that question. And if you sense any hesitation to say, even if you don't answer me now, anytime that you want to talk, my door, my phone line, whatever, it's open. My text, because more than likely you may get it that way, my text is open to you. We need to think about how we grow the next generation of trusted, culturally competent counselors. And we all know that schools are always having career days and all those sorts of things. So I challenge even the counselors who are here on this call today or on this virtual, think about being a part of career days at school, because you bring the excitement. You talk about how you, quite frankly, save lives in the work that you do. And so I want us to be intentional in all of our spaces about how we think about raising that next generation of counselors that we need. And then to Dr. Clark's point, this mental health is holistic, right? And so it isn't just having counselors, but it's how we're surrounding one another, not just individual, one another in the community, whether it is our faith-based institutions, our schools, family, friends, that we get often so busy that we really do forget to listen when we ask people, how are you doing? It has become just this thing we say and we keep walking. And I know that I have been guilty of that. But when we're asking one another, how are you? That we really do pause, that we wait, that we check, we truly check in, we check the pulse to make sure that the people who are around us are okay, and particularly for those who may have compassion fatigue, caregiver fatigue, for those of us who are in the work where we're serving the community, where it becomes overwhelming, that we're taking a moment just to think about that. I also want to put out this call to action really quickly before we leave, since so many people have been in the chat. Please put one thing in the chat that you're going to do after being with these amazing doctors on here today. So just think about that one thing that you will do. And I want to remind everyone that mental health and mental wellness, it is not an event. It is not a 1-hour session. It is a life practice. So choose to adopt that life practice today. Okay. Now to our dynamic presenters. You know, I'm feeling like I can go out and conquer the world. So thank you for, even as you were talking, I was writing down tips for myself on things that I need to do to be a better caregiver for Andrea. So thank you so much. So Dr. McIntyre, Dr. Lockhart-Walker, and Dr. Clark, you lifted us with your energy, and your words inspire us not just to help ourselves, but to help more people. And I do hope that in addition to UPO and our team members, that our sister agencies who are on here take the information that we received today to strengthen and bolster their organization and its services. I appreciate mental health being brought into the light and given the elevation and the conversation that it so deserves. I offer thanks to Dr. Roary, who is a facilitator extraordinaire. If you came in needing coffee, you don't need it now, because she brings the caffeine and the energy just in her behavior. So thank you so much, Dr. Roary, for injecting just the energy and positivity that you always bring whenever I speak to you. I appreciate that. And then I salute the UPO team who was a part of this, D'Angelo Rory for his effort in convening the panel, Joe Bukira, El Hilliard, Alice Jordan, Chivo, Zohar Rome, Marcus Ross, and Christina Franklin. And let me say, if there is a name that I forgot to call, charge it to my head and not to my heart, and I will buy you a Starbucks at some point. Somebody say, you forgot to call my name, I'll hook you up. Don't worry about it. And as we are or have transitioned from Black History Month, Black History, however, is every day of the year. It is history, it is American history. And as we're transitioning into Women's History Month, and same thing, Women's History is history. I want to lift two people that I think it would be worth highlighting. And there are two mental health pioneers that happen to be married to one another, Dr. Mamie Phipps Clark and her husband, Dr. Kenneth Bancroft Clark. And Dr. Clark, I don't know if you have any link or connection to them. If so, let us know, okay?
No.
Dr. Mamie Clark was the first Black woman to earn a doctorate degree in psychology from Columbia University. And Dr. Kenneth Clark was the first ever Black president of the American Psychological Association. You will probably remember them, however, from the famed doll studies, when dolls were presented to young Black children and asked, who's the good doll? Who's the good child? And which one is beautiful? And the answers that came from that, which then led to the first ever psychological research cited by the Supreme Court and was significant in the court's decision to end school desegregation. So if you have not heard about the doll studies, I encourage you after this to go look that up and learn about the work of the Clarks. So we stand on the shoulders of giants. We also stand on the shoulders of those who've been with us today. And for those of you who were in the chat who gave such insightful thoughts, we are standing with you and on your shoulders as we move forward. This will not be the final conversation about this, but we encourage you that as UPO continues this conversation around mental health, and then moving on to calls to action, that you do so, and let's stay connected with one another around this issue that where there is great opportunity. And I want us to see it that way. I don't want us to look at mental health and wellness as one where we are in a defeated posture. We're in a posture of new opportunities to address mental health, mental wellness from our children to those of us who are in, quote, midlife, to our elders, that there is space for loving on, lifting one another in many different ways in our goal and our approach to mental health and mental wellness. So again, I thank all of you for being with us today. Do not be strangers. Keep the conversation going. And remember, this is my charge. Find a young person today, very specifically, or an elder. Find someone, ask them, look them in the eye. How are you doing? And if they aren't okay, validate that right now they aren't okay. And let's talk about how we get them to be okay. And especially reach out to our brothers, okay? Thank you all and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure. Thank you.
Awesome.